The stagecoach lurched violently to the right as the wheel caught a deep rut, sending Catherine Kendrick crashing against the side window with enough force to rattle her teeth. The year was 1875, and the journey from St. Louis to Willow Creek, Wyoming territory, had already stretched her nerves to their breaking point. She clutched her leather-bound journal to her chest, the last gift from her departed father, as if it might somehow protect her from the brutal jostling of the Concorde coach. "Won't be much longer now, madam," the elderly gentleman across from her said with the weariness of someone who had made this journey many times before. "Another hour, maybe less, and you'll be seeing the rooftops of Willow Creek." Catherine attempted a polite smile despite her discomfort. At 22, she had never traveled this far west before. St. Louis had been the only home she'd known, but with both parents now gone and the family accounting firm sold to pay off debts, she had little choice but to accept her aunt's invitation to come west. A new teaching position awaited her in Willow Creek, assuming she survived the journey. "I certainly hope so, sir," she replied, tucking a loose strand of chestnut hair back into her once neat bun. "I'm not certain how much more of this." Her words were cut short by a sound that chilled her blood, the sharp crack of gunfire followed by a shout from the driver above. The stagecoach suddenly accelerated, bouncing Catherine and the other 3 passengers like corn in a hot skillet. "Road agents!" the elderly man exclaimed, his face going pale as he reached for a small derringer in his vest pocket. The woman beside him, who had been dozing, awakened with a start and let out a terrified gasp. The 4th passenger, a salesman with a handlebar mustache, pressed his face to the window. "They're gaining on us," he shouted. 3 riders, all armed. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. She had heard stories of stagecoach robberies, but never imagined she would experience one firsthand. The coach lurched again as the driver pushed the team of horses harder, the wheels bouncing wildly over the rough terrain. More gunshots rang out, closer now. The driver yelled something unintelligible, and the coach veered sharply to the left. Catherine heard the sickening crack of wood splitting second before she felt the coach begin to tip. Her stomach lurched as the vehicle toppled onto its side. In that moment, time seemed to slow. The elderly man flew across the cabin toward her. The salesman's sample case burst open, scattering tin goods and cloth samples. Catherine felt herself lifted from her seat as the coach rolled completely over. The door beside her splintered, and suddenly she was airborne, thrown clear of the tumbling vehicle into the open air. Her last conscious thought was of her journal slipping from her grasp as the ground rushed up to meet her. The pain came first, radiating from her shoulder and hip where she had landed hard on the rocky ground. Then awareness of cold, the chill of late afternoon seeping through her torn traveling dress. Catherine opened her eyes to a sky that spun dizzyingly above her. Somewhere nearby, horses whinnied in distress and men shouted. She tried to rise but fell back with a gasp of pain. Rolling to her side, she could see the overturned stagecoach about 30 yards away. One wheel still spun lazily in the air. Of the other passengers, there was no immediate sign. A gunshot cracked, followed by another. Then male voices, angry and threatening. Catherine forced herself to crawl toward a nearby clump of sagebrush, desperate for any cover. Her valise, her journal, everything was gone now. All that mattered was survival. From her hiding place, she watched in horror as 3 men on horseback circled the overturned coach. They wore bandanas over their faces and each carried a revolver. One dismounted and began rummaging through the luggage that had been strapped to the top of the coach. "Check inside," another called out. "Gotta be at least 1 money box." Catherine's throat constricted with fear as she thought of the other passengers. Had they survived? Where was the driver? She couldn't see the team of horses from her position, but she could hear their distressed movements. The third robber dismounted and approached the coach, gun drawn. Catherine held her breath, willing herself to be invisible among the scrubby brush. Her shoulder throbbed, and she was certain something was broken, but the fear of discovery kept her from making even the slightest sound. Time seemed to stretch as the bandits ransacked the coach. Catherine heard curses and shouts, then what sounded like a brief struggle. A single gunshot made her flinch, and she pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a cry. "Nothing worth taking," one of the men finally growled. "Just some mail and these here bags. What about the passengers?" Another asked. "Two dead inside. Driver's gone too, don't see the fourth one." Catherine's blood ran cold. Dead. Two people who had been sitting across from her mere minutes ago were now dead. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced them back. Now was not the time for grief or panic. "Spread out and look," the apparent leader ordered. "Manifest said 4 passengers. One's missing." Terror seized Catherine's heart. They were looking for her. She pressed herself flatter against the ground, ignoring the sharp stones digging into her side. The sagebrush provided minimal cover. If they searched thoroughly, they would find her. The sound of hoofbeats approaching from the north caught everyone's attention. The bandits turned toward the sound, guns raised. "Someone's coming," one hissed. "Let's go. What about the missing passenger?" "Forget it. Probably crawled off and died somewhere. We got what we could." "Move." Relief flooded through Catherine as the men mounted their horses and galloped away southward, disappearing behind a rise in the land. The approaching rider was still out of sight, but the sound of hoofbeats grew steadily louder. With the immediate danger past, the full extent of her injuries made themselves known. Her head pounded, and when she touched her temple, her fingers came away with blood. Her left shoulder refused to move properly, and each breath brought a stab of pain from her ribs. She was stranded in the wilderness, miles from anywhere, with night approaching and no supplies. The hoofbeats slowed, and Catherine heard a low whistle followed by a man's voice. "Steady now. Easy there." Gathering her courage, she raised herself slightly to peer over the sagebrush. A lone rider had stopped near the overturned coach. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a weathered hat and duster. From this distance, she couldn't make out his features, but something in his cautious approach told her he wasn't with the bandits. The man dismounted in one fluid motion and approached the coach, revolver drawn. He checked inside, then stepped back, removing his hat briefly as if in respect for the dead. He walked around the wreckage, examining the scene with the careful attention of someone who knew what to look for. Catherine tried to call out, but her voice emerged as little more than a croak. She swallowed hard and tried again. "Help," she managed, louder this time. "Please help." The man spun toward her voice, gun raised. His eyes scanned the landscape until they found her partial form behind the sagebrush. "Don't move," he called, his voice deep but not threatening. He approached cautiously, keeping his gun ready until he was close enough to see she posed no danger. The weapon disappeared into its holster as he knelt beside her. "Madam, you from the stage?" he asked, his blue eyes assessing her injuries with a practiced gaze. "Yes," Catherine whispered, relief making her light-headed. "Bandits, they shot. I see that, don't try to talk just yet." His hands were gentle as he checked her head wound. "Name's Henry Callahan. I've got a ranch about 5 miles north of here. Can you tell me where you're hurt?" "My shoulder," she managed. "Ribs. Head." Henry nodded, his expression grim but calm. "I need to check if anything's broken before I move you. This might hurt some." His examination was thorough but as gentle as possible. Catherine bit her lip to keep from crying out when he touched her shoulder. "Dislocated, I think," he said. Ribs might be cracked, but I don't think they're broken clean through. You're lucky, all things considered." He paused, looking back at the stagecoach. "The others weren't so fortunate." "3 passengers and the driver," Catherine said, fighting back tears. "I was thrown clear when we rolled." Henry's weather-beaten face softened with compassion. "That probably saved your life, madam. I'm sorry about the others." He stood and surveyed the area. "Those bandits might come back if they think better of leaving a witness. We need to get you somewhere safe." "My things," Catherine said, suddenly remembering. "My valise, my journal. I'll check what's left, but those road agents likely took anything of value." He hesitated. "What's your name, madam?" "Catherine. Catherine Kendrick. I was traveling to Willow Creek to stay with my aunt. She's arranged a teaching position for me there." Henry nodded. "Well, Miss Kendrick, first let's get you patched up, then we'll worry about getting you to Willow Creek." He returned to his horse and brought back a canteen. "Small sips," he instructed, helping her drink. The water revived her somewhat, and Catherine felt a little stronger. Henry left her to check the stagecoach, returning several minutes later with a small leather-bound book. "Found this a ways off. This your journal?" he asked, holding it up. Catherine's eyes filled with tears at the sight of it. "Yes, oh thank you, it was my father's." Henry handed it to her, then knelt beside her again. "Nothing else I could salvage that looks to be yours. They took most of the luggage." He glanced at the sky, where the sun was sinking toward the western horizon. "We need to move. I'm going to have to set that shoulder before we ride. It'll hurt something fierce, but it'll be worse if we wait." Catherine nodded, clutching her journal to her chest with her good arm. "Do what you must, Mr. Callahan." "Henry," he corrected. He positioned himself beside her. "Take a deep breath and hold it, on 3. He counted slowly, and on 3, he executed a swift, practiced movement. Pain exploded through Catherine's shoulder, and she couldn't suppress a cry. But almost immediately, the sharp agony subsided to a more manageable ache. She blinked away tears to find Henry watching her with concern. "Better?" he asked. She nodded, surprised to find that it was indeed better. "How did you know how to do that?" A shadow crossed his face. "War teaches a man things he'd rather not know," he said simply. "Can you stand, do you think?" With help, with Henry's strong support, Catherine managed to get to her feet. The world swam around her for a moment, but she fought back the dizziness. "I need to do something about those bodies," Henry said, his expression troubled. "Can't just leave them for the scavengers, but I can't dig proper graves either, not with night coming and you injured." "What will you do?" Catherine asked, leaning heavily against him. "Stack some stones over them for now. I'll ride back tomorrow with men from my ranch to bury them properly and salvage the coach." He helped her to a flat rock where she could sit. "Rest here. This won't take long." Catherine watched as Henry worked efficiently, first unhitching the surviving horses from the wrecked coach, then tending to the grim task of covering the bodies of her fellow passengers and the driver with stones. He worked with quiet respect, and Catherine found herself studying him. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard work and solving problems. His face was tanned and lined from years in the sun, but she guessed him to be no more than 30. There was strength in his broad shoulders and capable hands, but it was the gentleness in those hands that had surprised her most. When he finished, he stood silent for a moment, hat in hand, before returning to her side. "Time to go," he said, helping her to her feet. "My horse is steady, but it'll still be a rough ride with your injuries. I'll do my best to make it easy on you." Getting Catherine onto the horse was a painful challenge, but Henry's strong hands supported her until she was seated securely. He mounted behind her, one arm wrapped protectively around her waist to keep her from falling. "Lean back against me if you need to," he said, his voice close to her ear. "It's about an hour's ride to my place." As they set off at a gentle pace, Catherine was acutely aware of the solid warmth of the man behind her. Despite her pain and the tragedy she had just survived, she felt an unexpected sense of security in his presence. The sun was setting in a blaze of red and gold as they rode north, away from the scene of violence and toward an uncertain future. "I don't understand why they attacked," Catherine said after they had ridden in silence for some time. "The stagecoach wasn't carrying anything valuable that I know of." "Doesn't always make sense," Henry replied, his voice a rumble she could feel through his chest. "Some men just take what they want because they can. Been worse since the war. Too many men came home changed, with no place to fit anymore." His words carried a weight that suggested personal experience, but Catherine didn't press. Instead, she asked, "Will you report this to the authorities? Sheriff Matthews in Willow Creek is a good man. I'll send word to him once you're settled. He'll want to hear your account, but that can wait until you're stronger." The mention of Willow Creek reminded Catherine of her situation. "My aunt will be worried when I don't arrive. Is there a way to get word to her?" "We'll send a message first thing tomorrow," Henry assured her. "Who is your aunt? I know most folks in Willow Creek." "Margaret Kendrick. She runs the millinery shop on Main Street, I believe." Henry was quiet a moment. "Miss Margaret is your aunt. She's a fine woman, well respected in town." The familiar way he spoke of her aunt brought Catherine a measure of comfort. Perhaps this strange land wasn't entirely foreign after all. As they rode, the landscape changed subtly. The sparse scrubland gave way to more grassy terrain, with clusters of pine trees appearing more frequently. They crested a low rise, and Henry drew the horse to a halt. "There it is," he said, pointing ahead. "Callahan Ranch." In the fading light, Catherine could make out a collection of buildings nestled in a small valley. A substantial log house formed the center, with a barn and several outbuildings arranged nearby. Fenced pastures stretched out on either side, and a creek cut through the property, reflecting the last golden rays of sunlight. "It's lovely," she said honestly. "It's home," Henry replied, a note of pride in his voice. "Built most of it with my own hands after I came back from the war. Started with nothing but the land grant and a few head of cattle." They continued down the slope toward the ranch. As they approached, Catherine saw a figure emerge from the main house, carrying a lantern. "That'll be Mrs. Wilkins," Henry explained. "She keeps house for me and helps with the cooking. Good woman. Widow. Her husband rode with me during the war." The woman held the lantern high as they rode into the yard. She was stout and gray-haired, with a kind face creased with concern as she took in the sight of Catherine slumped in front of Henry. "Land sakes, Henry, what's happened?" she called out. "Stagecoach robbery, Mrs. Wilkins," Henry answered, bringing the horse to a stop. "Miss Kendrick here was thrown clear, but she's hurt. The others didn't make it." Mrs. Wilkins's expression softened with sympathy. "Poor dear. Bring her inside, quick now. I'll heat water and get the spare room ready." Henry dismounted first, then reached up to help Catherine down. The movement sent fresh pain through her ribs and shoulder, and her legs buckled as her feet touched the ground. Without hesitation, Henry swept her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. "I can walk," Catherine protested weakly, embarrassed by her helplessness. "No need," he replied, already striding toward the house. "You've been through enough today." Being carried in the strong arms of this stranger should have felt improper, but Catherine was too exhausted and in too much pain to worry about propriety. She let her head rest against his shoulder as he carried her up the porch steps and into the warm glow of the house. The main room was simply but comfortably furnished, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. A fire burned low in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the polished wooden floor. Henry carried her through to a smaller room off to the side, where Mrs. Wilkins was already turning down the covers on a neatly made bed. "Set her down easy," the older woman instructed. "I'll fetch clean linens and my medicine box." Henry lowered Catherine onto the bed with surprising gentleness. "Mrs. Wilkins was a nurse during the war," he told her. "You're in good hands." Catherine managed a small smile despite her pain. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Something flickered in his blue eyes, compassion, perhaps, or something deeper. "Just doing what anyone would," he said gruffly, stepping back from the bed. "I'll see to my horse and send one of the hands to Willow Creek with a message for your aunt. You rest now." After he left, Mrs. Wilkins returned with an armful of clean linens and a wooden box of medical supplies. "That man," she said with fond exasperation, "would carry the weight of the whole world if you let him. Now, let's get you out of these dirty clothes and see to those injuries proper." With Mrs. Wilkins's help, Catherine changed into a borrowed nightgown, wincing as each movement aggravated her injuries. The older woman cleaned and bandaged the cut on her temple, then wrapped her ribs tightly. "Nothing broken that I can tell," she pronounced, "but you'll be black and blue come morning." "Henry did a fine job with that shoulder. He has a healer's hands, though he'd never admit it." "He seems like a good man," Catherine said, sinking back against the pillows. Mrs. Wilkins smiled knowingly. "One of the best, though life hasn't always been kind to him." "Now drink this," she added, holding out a cup of strong-smelling tea. "It'll help with the pain and let you sleep." Catherine obediently sipped the bitter brew, too tired to ask questions about her mysterious rescuer. As the medicinal tea took effect, she felt herself drifting toward sleep, the horrors of the day temporarily receding. Her last conscious thought was of strong arms carrying her to safety and blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. Morning light filtered through curtained windows when Catherine next opened her eyes. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to place the unfamiliar ceiling above her or the comfortable bed beneath. Then memory returned: the stagecoach, the attack being thrown clear, and the cowboy who had found her, Henry Callahan. The man who had carried her to safety. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her ribs. Her involuntary gasp brought Mrs. Wilkins hurrying into the room. "Easy does it, Miss Kendrick," the housekeeper scolded gently. "Those ribs need time to heal." "What time is it?" Catherine asked, allowing the older woman to help her into a sitting position propped up by pillows. "Just past 8 in the morning." "You slept straight through the night, which is the best medicine there is." Mrs. Wilkins poured water from a pitcher into a glass and helped Catherine drink. "How's the pain this morning?" "Better than yesterday," Catherine answered truthfully, though better was a relative term. Every breath still hurt, her shoulder ached deeply and her head pounded, but the sharp, immediate agony had subsided to a more manageable discomfort. "Good. I've brought you some of my own clothes to wear for now. They'll be too large, but they're clean." Mrs. Wilkins gestured to a folded stack on the dresser. "And there's hot water in the basin for washing up. I'll help you when you're ready for breakfast." "Has word been sent to my aunt?" Catherine asked, suddenly remembering her family's likely concern. "Henry sent young Tomas to town last night with a message. Your aunt knows you're safe and where you are. Henry said she'd likely be out to see you today herself." Mrs. Wilkins bustled about the room, opening the curtains wider to admit more light. "Now, do you think you can eat something?" "I've made flapjacks and there's coffee brewing." Despite everything, Catherine found she was hungry. "Yes, thank you. That sounds wonderful." Mrs. Wilkins helped her wash and dress, a slow and painful process that left Catherine breathless. The borrowed dress hung loosely on her slender frame, but it was clean and comfortable. Her chestnut hair, usually arranged in a neat bun, fell in waves down her back. She lacked the strength to lift her arms long enough to pin it up. "You look better with some color in your cheeks, Mrs. Wilkins pronounced when they'd finished. "Let's get some food in you." Leaning heavily on the older woman's arm, Catherine made her way slowly to the kitchen, where the promised breakfast awaited. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with bunches of dried herbs hanging from the rafters and copper pots gleaming on hooks along one wall. A round oak table dominated the center of the room, already set for breakfast. Henry rose from his chair as they entered. He was dressed simply in a blue cotton shirt and denim trousers, his dark hair still damp from washing. Something in his expression softened when he saw Catherine. "Miss Kendrick," he said with a slight nod. "Good to see you on your feet." "Thanks to your care, Mr. Callahan," she replied, carefully lowering herself into the chair he held for her. "I owe you my life." A flush of color touched his tanned cheeks. "No need for that kind of talk. Any decent man would have done the same. Mrs. Wilkins made a sound that might have been a snort as she set a plate of golden flapjacks in front of Catherine. "Decent men are rarer than you think these days, Henry Callahan, and you know it." He shook his head but didn't argue, instead pouring coffee for Catherine from a battered tin pot. "How are you feeling this morning, truthfully now?" "Sore," Catherine admitted, "but alive, which is more than can be said for my fellow passengers." The memory of the attack brought a lump to her throat, but she swallowed it down. "Have you learned anything more about the robbers?" Henry's expression darkened. "I rode out at first light with 2 of my hands. We buried the dead and salvaged what we could from the coach. No sign of the bandits, but the tracks suggest they headed south toward the territory line." He took a sip of coffee. "Sheriff Matthews will be riding out today to investigate, and he'll want to hear your account when you're up to it." Catherine nodded, pushing food around her plate. Despite her hunger, the reminder of yesterday's violence had diminished her appetite. "Did you find any more of my belongings?" "Just this," Henry said, reaching into his pocket. He placed a small silver locket on the table. "It was on the ground near where you fell." Catherine's hand flew to her throat where the locket had hung. "My mother's," she whispered, picking it up with trembling fingers. "I thought it was lost forever. Thank you." Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Henry was the first to look away. "Mrs. Wilkins tells me you're heading to Willow Creek to teach," he said, changing the subject. "The town's been hoping to start a proper school for some time." Grateful for the shift in conversation, Catherine nodded. "Yes, my aunt arranged it. I taught children in St. Louis for 2 years, but when my father died and our family business had to be sold, I found myself in need of a new situation." "The children of Willow Creek will be fortunate to have a real teacher," Henry said. "Most have had to make do with whatever schooling their parents could provide." "Do you have children in the town?" Catherine asked, curious about his interest. He shook his head. "No, madam. No wife, no children. But I sit on the town council, and education has been a concern of ours for some time." Before Catherine could respond, the sound of hoofbeats outside drew their attention. Mrs. Wilkins moved to the window. "It's a buggy," she announced. "Looks like Miss Margaret herself, and she's not alone. Sheriff Matthews is with her." Henry stood immediately. "I'll go meet them," he said, giving Catherine a reassuring nod. "Take your time finishing breakfast." As he strode from the kitchen, Mrs. Wilkins clicked her tongue. That poor woman must have been beside herself with worry, and the sheriff wasting no time as usual. That man never could leave a stone unturned. Catherine attempted to rise, but Mrs. Wilkins gently pressed her back into her chair. "Finish that coffee, child. They'll be in momentarily and you'll need your strength." Sure enough, within minutes the kitchen door burst open and a plump, well-dressed woman in her 50s rushed in, her face a mask of concern. "Catherine, my dear girl," she exclaimed, hurrying to Catherine's side. "When you didn't arrive on the stage yesterday, I feared the worst." Then Mr. Callahan's man brought word of the robbery. "Oh, I've been sick with worry, Aunt Margaret," Catherine said, allowing herself to be carefully embraced. "I'm all right, truly. Mr. Callahan saved me." Margaret Kendrick pulled back to examine her niece's face, her eyes filling with tears. "You poor child. What a terrible welcome to Wyoming territory." She turned to Henry, who had followed her in along with a stern-looking man wearing a sheriff's badge. "Mr. Callahan, I cannot thank you enough for rescuing my niece." Henry looked uncomfortable with the praise. "As I told Miss Kendrick, anyone would have done the same. But it wasn't anyone, it was you," Margaret insisted. "And I won't forget it." She turned back to Catherine. "As soon as you're well enough to travel, I'll bring you home to Willow Creek where you belong." The sheriff cleared his throat. He was a tall man with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed mustache that did little to soften his severe expression. "Miss Kendrick, I'm Sheriff Matthews. I hate to trouble you when you're recovering, but I need to ask you some questions about the robbery." Henry frowned. "Can it wait, Matthews? She's barely out of bed." "It's all right, Mr. Callahan," Catherine said. "I want to help catch these men if I can." For the next half hour, Catherine recounted everything she could remember about the attack, the sound of gunfire, the coach overturning, being thrown clear, and what she had observed while hiding in the sagebrush. The sheriff listened intently, occasionally making notes in a small book. "Did you get a good look at any of their faces?" he asked. Catherine shook her head. "They wore bandanas, but one was very tall, another heavyset. The third was smaller, younger maybe. I couldn't hear their names. And they were heading south, you say?" The sheriff directed this question to Henry. "That's what the tracks showed," Henry confirmed. "Toward the territorial border. If they cross into Colorado, they'll be beyond your jurisdiction." The sheriff's mouth tightened. "I'm well aware of that, Callahan. All the more reason to move quickly." He closed his notebook and turned back to Catherine. "Thank you, Miss Kendrick. You've been most helpful. I'm sorry for what you've endured, but grateful you survived to tell the tale." "When do you think I might be able to travel to Willow Creek?" Catherine asked her aunt. Margaret exchanged glances with Mrs. Wilkins. "The doctor's out of town until tomorrow," she said. "I'd like him to examine you before we attempt the journey. It's not far, but the roads are rough." "She's welcome to stay here until the doctor clears her to travel," Henry said. "Mrs. Wilkins is experienced with injuries, and we have plenty of room." "That's very kind, Mr. Callahan," Margaret said, though Catherine detected a note of hesitation in her aunt's voice. "But I wouldn't want to impose further on your hospitality." "It's no imposition," Henry insisted. "And it would be better for Miss Kendrick not to be moved until we're sure it's safe." A silent communication seemed to pass between the adults in the room, something Catherine couldn't quite interpret. Finally, her aunt nodded. "Very well. If Catherine is comfortable with the arrangement, she can remain here until Dr. Wilson has seen her." Margaret turned to her niece. "What do you say, dear? Would you prefer to stay or try to make the journey to town today?" Catherine thought of the pain that even the slightest movement caused her. The prospect of a buggy ride, even a short one, was daunting. "I think it might be best if I stayed until the doctor comes," she said. "If Mr. Callahan is certain it's no trouble." "No trouble at all," Henry said, and the gentleness in his voice made Catherine's heart beat a little faster. The sheriff departed soon after, promising to send word if he discovered anything about the bandits. Margaret stayed longer, fussing over Catherine and engaging in polite conversation with Mrs. Wilkins, whom she evidently knew well. Henry excused himself to tend to ranch business, leaving the women to talk. Once they were alone, Margaret leaned closer to Catherine. "How are you really, my dear? I was frantic when you didn't arrive yesterday." "I'm better than I have any right to be," Catherine admitted. "If Mr. Callahan hadn't come along when he did." She shuddered at the thought. "He's a good man," Margaret said, watching Catherine's face carefully. "One of the most respected ranchers in the county, though he keeps to himself mostly. Came here after the war with nothing but determination and built this place from the ground up." "Mrs. Wilkins mentioned he was in the war," Catherine said, her curiosity piqued. "Was he an officer?" "Captain in the Union Army," Margaret confirmed. "Cavalry. There are stories." She hesitated, then shook her head. "But that's not for me to tell. Suffice it to say, he saw things no young man should see, and he came west to leave those memories behind." "He seems peaceful," Catherine observed. "Despite everything." Margaret smiled knowingly. "He's found a measure of peace here, yes, but a man needs more than just land and cattle to be truly content." She patted Catherine's hand. "Now I've brought a few of your things from the trunks you sent ahead. Nightgowns, a clean dress, your hairbrush and toiletries." "Thank you, Aunt Margaret. That was thoughtful of you." "I'll come back tomorrow with Dr. Wilson," Margaret promised as she prepared to leave. "And don't worry about the teaching position. School doesn't start for another 2 weeks, so you have time to recover." After Margaret's departure, Catherine found herself exhausted by the morning's activities. Mrs. Wilkins helped her back to bed, where she dozed fitfully, dreams of tumbling stagecoaches and faceless bandits disturbing her sleep. She awakened in late afternoon to find a tray of food beside her bed and her journal on the nightstand. A note in a firm, masculine hand read simply, "Thought you might want this close by. Rest well. H.C." The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought unexpected tears to Catherine's eyes. She reached for the journal, tracing the worn leather binding that bore her father's initials. Inside were not only her own writings but also her father's, his thoughts, his hopes, his love for his family preserved in ink. It was her most precious possession, and Henry had understood its importance. With careful movements, she sat up in bed and opened to a blank page. Despite the pain in her shoulder, she began to write, recording the events of the past 2 days while they were still fresh in her mind. The act of writing had always brought her clarity, and she found it soothing now, a familiar routine in unfamiliar surroundings. She was so absorbed in her writing that she didn't hear the soft knock at first. When it came again, louder, she called, "Come in." The door opened, and Henry stood there, looking slightly hesitant. He had changed into clean clothes, and his hair was combed neatly back from his forehead. "I didn't mean to disturb you," he said. "Mrs. Wilkins asked me to check if you needed anything while she's preparing dinner." "I'm fine, thank you," Catherine replied, closing her journal. "The food was delicious, and I appreciate your note about the journal." He stepped into the room but remained near the door as if concerned about propriety. "Your aunt mentioned it was important to you. I'm glad I could find it." "It was my father's," Catherine explained. "He started keeping it when I was born, writing down thoughts he wanted to share with me someday. After he died last winter, I began writing in it too. It helps me feel connected to him still." Henry nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My father had a pocket watch. Nothing fancy, just silver with his initials engraved on it. When he passed, my mother gave it to me. Carried it through the war, all the way to Appomattox. It doesn't even keep proper time anymore, but I can't bring myself to part with it." "It's the connection that matters, not the object itself," Catherine said softly. "Exactly." Henry seemed surprised by her understanding. "Your aunt says you're to be the new teacher in Willow Creek." Catherine nodded. "Yes, though I must admit I'm nervous about it. Teaching city children in St. Louis was one thing. A one-room schoolhouse in Wyoming territory will be quite another. The children here are eager to learn, Henry said. Most have had limited schooling, but they're bright and curious. My foreman's son, Tomas, the boy I sent with the message to your aunt, he taught himself to read using old newspapers and a Bible. He sounds remarkable. They all are in their own ways. Henry shifted his weight, looking slightly uncomfortable. I hope you'll like it here in Wyoming. It's not as refined as St. Louis, but there's a beauty to this land once you get to know it. I've already seen some of that beauty, Catherine said. Even from a jostling stagecoach, the landscape was breathtaking. A ghost of a smile touched Henry's lips. Wait until you see it in spring when the meadows are carpeted with wildflowers, or in winter with fresh snow on the mountains. His voice held a quiet passion that Catherine found compelling. You love it here, she observed. I do. He met her gaze directly. This land saved me when I thought nothing could, gave me purpose again, a reason to wake up each morning. The raw honesty in his voice stirred something in Catherine. Before she could respond, Mrs. Wilkins's voice called from down the hall. Henry, can you help me with this roast? Coming. He called back. To Catherine, he said, would you like to join us for dinner, or would you prefer to eat here? Catherine considered her aching body but found she was reluctant to spend another meal alone in the bedroom. I'd like to join you if it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all. I'll come help you to the table when dinner's ready. He paused at the door. It's good to see you feeling stronger, Miss Kendrick. After he left, Catherine stared thoughtfully at the closed door. There was something about Henry Callahan that intrigued her, a depth beneath his reserved exterior, a kindness that seemed to come naturally to him despite whatever hardships he had endured. She recalled her aunt's words. A man needs more than just land and cattle to be truly content. Looking around the comfortable but simple room, Catherine wondered if Henry was truly content with his solitary life on this beautiful but isolated ranch. And why the thought should matter to her, a woman he'd known for barely a day, she couldn't quite explain. The next day dawned clear and cool, with a crispness to the air that hinted at the approaching autumn. Catherine awoke feeling marginally stronger, the worst of her pain having subsided to a persistent but manageable ache. She managed to dress herself in the clean clothes her aunt had brought, though the effort left her breathless. Mrs. Wilkins arrived with breakfast and helped Catherine arrange her hair in a simple braid. You're looking more yourself today, the housekeeper observed. A bit of color in your cheeks does wonders. I feel better, Catherine admitted, though I confess I'm not looking forward to the doctor's examination. Dr. Wilson's a good man, gruff as a bear sometimes, but skilled with his medicine. Mrs. Wilkins adjusted the pillows behind Catherine's back. Henry's already gone out with the men. They're moving cattle to the north pasture today. Said to tell you he'd see you at supper. Catherine tried to ignore the small flutter of disappointment at this news. He works very hard, she observed. Never knew a man to work harder, Mrs. Wilkins agreed. Up before dawn most days, last to come in at night. This ranch is his life. Has he never thought of marriage? The question slipped out before Catherine could stop it, and she felt heat rise to her face. Forgive me, that's none of my business. Mrs. Wilkins didn't seem offended. Instead, she gave Catherine a shrewd look. There was a girl before the war. They were to be married when he returned, but Henry came back changed like so many did. She couldn't understand what he'd been through and he couldn't explain it. Eventually, she married someone else. How terrible for him, Catherine said softly. It was for the best in the end, Mrs. Wilkins said firmly. She wasn't strong enough for him. Henry needs someone who can understand that some wounds don't show on the outside. She patted Catherine's hand. Now eat your breakfast before it gets cold. Your aunt and the doctor should be here by midday. True to Mrs. Wilkins's prediction, Margaret arrived with Dr. Wilson shortly after noon. The doctor was indeed as gruff as promised, a barrel-chested man with bushy side whiskers and hands that seemed too large for his profession. But his examination was thorough and surprisingly gentle. "Dislocated shoulders been set properly," he pronounced. "Ribs are bruised but not broken. Head wound is healing clean. You're a fortunate young woman, Miss Kendrick." "That's what everyone keeps telling me," Catherine replied. "When will I be able to travel to Willow Creek?" The doctor stroked his whiskers thoughtfully. "I'd prefer you wait another day or two before attempting even that short journey. The roads are rough, and jolting about in a buggy won't do those ribs any favors." Margaret, who had been hovering anxiously nearby, looked concerned. "Are you sure she's receiving proper care here, doctor?" "Perhaps she'd recover faster in town, where you could check on her more easily." "She's getting excellent care," Dr. Wilson said firmly. "Mrs. Wilkins was one of the best nurses I worked with during the war, and Callahan's place is quiet and clean." He turned to Catherine. "Rest, young lady. That's my prescription. Rest and good food for at least a week before you even think about starting your teaching duties." After the doctor left, Margaret sat beside Catherine's bed, fidgeting with her gloves. "Are you truly comfortable here, Catherine? I could insist on bringing you to town if you prefer." "I'm fine, Aunt Margaret," Catherine assured her. "Everyone has been most kind, and as the doctor said, it's quiet here, good for recovery." Margaret didn't look entirely convinced. "It's just a young, unmarried woman staying in a bachelor's home, even with Mrs. Wilkins as chaperone. People might talk." Catherine hadn't considered the potential for gossip. Would it really be so scandalous? Under the circumstances, Willow Creek is a small town, dear. "People notice things and they talk." Margaret sighed. "Not that anyone would think ill of Henry Callahan, he's highly respected. But your new and first impressions matter, especially for a teacher." "I understand," Catherine said, though she felt a pang of regret at the thought of leaving the ranch sooner than necessary. "Perhaps tomorrow or the next day if I'm stronger." Margaret seemed relieved. "Yes, that would be best. I've prepared the spare room for you, and Mrs. Peterson next door is eager to meet you. She's on the school board and has been instrumental in establishing the new schoolhouse." They spent the next hour discussing Catherine's teaching position and the preparations for the upcoming school term. Margaret had already ordered books and supplies, and the schoolhouse, a modest but sturdy building on the edge of town, was nearly ready. 28 children have been enrolled so far," Margaret explained. "Ages 6 to 16, with varying levels of education. Some can barely read while others are quite advanced." "It will be challenging," Catherine acknowledged, "but rewarding too, I hope." "The town is so excited to have a proper teacher at last," Margaret said. "You'll be welcomed warmly, I promise you." After Margaret departed, promising to return the next day with the buggy, Catherine found herself restless. The prospect of leaving the ranch brought mixed emotions. She was eager to see the town that would be her new home and to begin establishing her classroom. But there was something about the peaceful rhythm of life at Callahan Ranch that appealed to her. And if she were honest with herself, there was something about its owner that intrigued her more than she cared to admit. Feeling stronger than she had since the accident, Catherine decided to venture outside. She wrapped a borrowed shawl around her shoulders and made her way carefully through the house to the front porch. The late afternoon sun bathed the landscape in golden light, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and grass. She settled into a rocking chair, breathing deeply despite the twinge in her ribs. The view was spectacular, rolling meadows giving way to foothills that rose toward distant mountains. Cattle grazed peacefully in a nearby pasture, and closer to the house, A vegetable garden displayed neat rows of late summer produce. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Mrs. Wilkins said, appearing in the doorway with 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Catherine before taking a seat in the neighboring rocker. "I never tire of this view." "It's breathtaking," Catherine agreed, sipping the fragrant tea. "How long have you lived here, Mrs. Wilkins?" "Going on 8 years now. Came with my husband, Frank, when Henry first bought the land. Frank and Henry served together in the war." A shadow passed over the older woman's face. "Lost Frank 4 years ago to pneumonia. Henry insisted I stay on, said the ranch needed a woman's touch. Truth is, I think he knew I had nowhere else to go." "He seems like a very thoughtful man," Catherine observed. "That he is, though he hides it well sometimes," Mrs. Wilkins agreed. She gave Catherine a sidelong glance. "Your aunt seemed in quite a hurry to get you to town." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "She's concerned about propriety. A teacher must be beyond reproach, especially in a small community." Mrs. Wilkins snorted softly. "As if anyone who knows Henry would think for a moment he'd behave improperly. The man's as honorable as the day is long." "I believe that," Catherine said quickly. "But Aunt Margaret is right. I am new to Willow Creek, and first impressions matter." "I suppose they do," Mrs. Wilkins conceded. She rocked silently for a moment, then added, "It's been good having another woman in the house, even if just for a few days. This place could use a feminine presence more permanent than mine." Before Catherine could respond to this rather pointed observation, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. A group of riders appeared over the rise, dust rising from their horses' hooves in the golden afternoon light. Even at a distance, Catherine recognized Henry's broad-shouldered figure leading the group. "Right on time," Mrs. Wilkins said, rising from her chair. "I'd better see to supper. Those men will be hungry after a day of moving cattle." Catherine remained on the porch, watching as the riders approached the ranch. There were 5 of them: Henry, a gray-haired man who appeared to be the foreman, and 3 younger cowboys. They rode with the easy confidence of men who had spent their lives in the saddle. As they reached the yard, Henry spotted Catherine on the porch. He said something to the others, who continued toward the barn, then guided his horse, a magnificent chestnut, gelding toward the house. He dismounted in one fluid motion and removed his hat as he approached the porch. "Miss Kendrick," he greeted her, his face dusty but his smile genuine. "It's good to see you up and about. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you," she replied. "Dr. Wilson says I'm healing well." Henry leaned against the porch railing, his hat in his hands. "I heard he recommended you stay quiet for a few more days." "Yes, though my aunt is eager to bring me to town tomorrow or the next day," Catherine said. "She's concerned about appearances." Understanding dawned in Henry's eyes, and he nodded slowly. "Of course. Small towns and their sensibilities." There was no judgment in his voice, only a hint of resignation. "Mrs. Wilkins is a respected widow, but I suppose that's not enough to silence wagging tongues." "It seems ridiculous, given the circumstances," Catherine said, surprised by the force of her own annoyance. "You saved my life. Where else would I have gone?" A smile tugged at the corner of Henry's mouth. "Your aunt is right to be cautious. A teacher needs to be above reproach, and you haven't even had a chance to establish yourself in Willow Creek yet." "Is it always so restrictive?" Catherine asked. "In St. Louis, at least in our circle, there seemed to be more allowance for unusual circumstances." "Towns like Willow Creek are built on reputations," Henry explained. "Out here, a person's word and character are sometimes all they have. Once lost, they're nearly impossible to regain." He straightened up from the railing. "But don't let that discourage you. The people here are good-hearted once they know you." "And do they know you, Mr. Callahan?" The question slipped out unbidden. His eyes met hers, and something in their blue depths made her heart beat faster. "Some do," he said quietly, "but a man doesn't always want to be known completely." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Catherine couldn't name. Then Henry cleared his throat and settled his hat back on his head. "I should clean up before supper," he said. "Mrs. Wilkins gets cross if I track dirt into her kitchen." "Of course," Catherine said, suddenly flustered. "I should go in as well. The evening air is getting cool." Henry offered his arm to help her rise from the rocking chair. His touch was steady and warm through the thin fabric of her dress, and she was acutely aware of his strength as she leaned on him momentarily. "Thank you," she murmured, reluctantly releasing his arm once she was standing. "My pleasure, Miss Kendrick." As they walked into the house together, Catherine found herself wishing, quite irrationally, that her recovery might take just a little longer than expected. Supper that evening was a lively affair. The foreman, Mr. Dawson, joined them, along with Tomas, the young man who had carried the message to Catherine's aunt. Tomas was only 17 but carried himself with the confidence of someone older. He regarded Catherine with undisguised curiosity. "Is it true you're going to teach at the new school, Miss Kendrick?" he asked as Mrs. Wilkins served roast beef and potatoes. "Yes, that's the plan," Catherine replied. "Once I've recovered my strength." "I've always wanted proper schooling," Tomas said eagerly. "Mr. Callahan's been teaching me when he has time, but he says I need a real teacher for subjects like history and mathematics." Catherine glanced at Henry in surprise. "You've been teaching him?" Henry looked slightly embarrassed. "Just the basics. Rating, some arithmetic. Nothing formal." "He's being modest," Mr. Dawson interjected. "Boss has quite a library in his study, and he's made sure every hand on this ranch can at least read and cipher enough to get by." "Education matters," Henry said simply, "even especially out here." "Would it be possible for Tomas to attend the school in town?" Catherine asked. "He seems very eager to learn." "The ranch is a long ride from town," Henry said, "but if he wants to go, we can arrange it." He looked at the young man. "It would mean early mornings and late returns, and you'd still have your duties here." "I don't mind, sir," Tomas said quickly. "I could do both." "We'll see," Henry said, not unkindly. "Let's wait until Miss Kendrick is settled and the school is actually open before making plans." The conversation shifted to ranch business, and Catherine found herself watching Henry interact with his men. There was mutual respect evident in their exchanges, and occasional flashes of humor that revealed a side of Henry she hadn't yet seen. He was a natural leader, firm but fair, and clearly well liked by those who worked for him. After the meal, Mr. Dawson and Tomas returned to the bunkhouse while Mrs. Wilkins cleared the table, refusing Catherine's offer of help. "You're still recovering," she insisted. "Besides, you two young people should enjoy the evening. Maybe Henry can show you his library. He's quite proud of it, though he'd never admit it." Henry looked slightly uncomfortable at the suggestion, but when Catherine expressed interest, he nodded. "I'd be happy to show you, if you're not too tired." He led her to a room at the back of the house that Catherine hadn't yet seen. When he opened the door, she couldn't suppress a gasp of surprise. 3 walls were lined with bookshelves, filled from floor to ceiling with volumes of every size. A large desk stood near the window, and a comfortable leather chair was positioned beside a small fireplace. A well-used chessboard sat on a small table nearby. "This is remarkable," Catherine said, moving to examine the nearest shelf. "I never expected to find such a collection in." She trailed off, realizing how that might sound, in a cowboy's ranch house. Henry finished for her, amusement rather than offense in his voice. "Most of these were my father's. He was a professor of literature before he became a minister. I've added to the collection over the years." Catherine ran her fingers gently over the spines of the books. Shakespeare, Dickens, Irving, Cooper, Emerson, Thoreau, the classics were well represented, along with histories, scientific works, and volumes of poetry. "My father loved books too," she said softly. "Our home in St. Louis was full of them. When we had to sell the house after his death, giving up his library was one of the hardest parts." "Books become friends," Henry said, understanding in his voice. "It's hard to part with friends." Catherine turned to find him watching her, his expression thoughtful. "Yes, exactly," she smiled. "You surprise me, Mr. Callahan." "Henry," he corrected her. "After all we've been through, I think we can dispense with formalities, at least in private." "Henry," she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her lips. "Then you must call me Catherine." "Catherine." He said it slowly, as if savoring the sound. "It suits you." Their eyes met, and that same inexplicable connection she had felt on the porch flickered between them again. Catherine found herself noticing details she hadn't before: the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, the strong line of his jaw beneath his neatly trimmed beard. The clock on the mantel chimed, breaking the moment. Henry cleared his throat. "You should rest," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Your aunt will be here tomorrow to take you to town. You'll need your strength for the journey." "Yes, of course," Catherine agreed, though she felt strangely reluctant to leave the warmth of the library and its owner's company. "Thank you for showing me your books. You're welcome to borrow any that interest you," he offered, "even after you've gone to town." "That's very kind. I might take you up on that offer." Catherine moved toward the door, then paused. "Henry." "Yes, thank you. Not just for rescuing me, but for your hospitality these past days. It's meant a great deal." His expression softened. "You're welcome in my home anytime, Catherine." The sincerity in his voice warmed her more than she could explain, and she carried that warmth with her as she made her way back to her room. Despite her aunt's concerns and her own duties awaiting her in town, Catherine couldn't deny the growing attraction she felt toward the quiet rancher with the surprising depth. Sleep came slowly that night, her thoughts filled with blue eyes and a gentle voice saying her name. Morning brought a light rainfall that drummed steadily on the roof, turning the world outside to shades of gray and green. Catherine packed the few belongings her aunt had brought her, along with the treasured journal that had survived the stagecoach attack. Her body still ached, but the sharp pain had subsided to a dull discomfort that was manageable with careful movement. Mrs. Wilkins brought her a breakfast tray with coffee, biscuits, and preserves. "Thought you might prefer to eat in your room this morning, what with the packing and all," she said, though her knowing look suggested other reasons. "Thank you," Catherine said, accepting the tray gratefully. "Is Mr. Callahan, is Henry about this morning?" "Gone out at first light, despite the rain," Mrs. Wilkins replied. "Had business with a neighbor about water rights. Said to tell you goodbye and safe travels if he didn't make it back before you left." She hesitated. "He doesn't say much, our Henry, but I know he's sorry to see you go." Catherine felt a pang of disappointment. "I'd hoped to thank him once more before leaving." "You'll see him again soon enough," Mrs. Wilkins said confidently. "Willow Creek isn't so big that paths don't cross regularly. Besides, he sits on the school board. You'll be working together whether you plan to or not." This thought cheered Catherine somewhat, and she finished her breakfast with better spirits. By mid-morning the rain had stopped, though the sky remained overcast. She was sitting in the parlor, reading a volume of Emerson's essays that Henry had left for her, when the sound of an approaching buggy announced her aunt's arrival. Margaret seemed relieved to find Catherine up and dressed, ready for travel. "You look much better, dear," she said, embracing her niece carefully. "Some color in your cheeks at last. Has Mrs. Wilkins been feeding you well?" "Like a queen," Catherine confirmed, returning the embrace. "I'll miss her cooking." "Well, I'm no Mrs. Wilkins in the kitchen, but I manage well enough," Margaret said. "And Mrs. Peterson next door has already promised to bring over a welcome dinner tonight. Everyone's eager to meet you." As Catherine gathered her things and prepared to leave, she found herself lingering, hoping Henry might return in time to say goodbye. But the minutes ticked by, and there was no sign of him. Finally, with her belongings loaded in the buggy and no further reason to delay, she embraced Mrs. Wilkins warmly. "Thank you for everything," she said. "I can't tell you how grateful I am for your care." "Pish-posh," Mrs. Wilkins said gruffly, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "It was nice having someone to fuss over besides that stubborn man of mine." She pressed a cloth-wrapped package into Catherine's hands. "Biscuits for the road, and don't be a stranger. The ranch is always open to you." The ride to Willow Creek took just under an hour, with Margaret driving the buggy carefully to avoid jostling Catherine's still tender ribs. As they traveled, Margaret pointed out landmarks and told stories about the area and its people. "That's the Johnson place," she said, indicating a small homestead nestled against a hillside. "Came out from Pennsylvania 3 years ago. He's a wheelwright, and she makes the finest quilts you'll ever see. And over there, that's where the millers run sheep, much to the cattlemen's dismay. There's always been tension between sheep and cattle ranchers, though it's been peaceful enough in our county." Catherine listened with interest, trying to absorb the names and connections that would be important in her new community. But part of her mind remained at Callahan Ranch, wondering if Henry had returned yet, what he might be doing, whether he was thinking of her at all. They crested a small rise, and Willow Creek came into view, a tidy collection of buildings arranged along a single main street, with smaller streets branching off to residential areas. A white church steeple rose above the other structures, and the creek that gave the town its name wound along its eastern edge, lined with the willow trees that were its namesake. "It's charming," Catherine said sincerely. With perhaps 200 residents, Willow Creek was a fraction of the size of St. Louis, but it had a neat, welcoming appearance that immediately appealed to her. "Wait until you see the new schoolhouse," Margaret said proudly. "The whole town contributed to its construction. It's small, but well built, with plenty of windows for light and a proper slate board." They drove down the main street, where Margaret pointed out the essential businesses: the general store, the bank, a small hotel, the sheriff's office, the doctor's residence and surgery, and her own millinery shop. People on the boardwalks waved or called greetings, studying Catherine with undisguised curiosity. "News travels fast," Margaret explained. "Everyone knows about the stagecoach robbery and your rescue by Henry Callahan. You'll be answering questions for weeks, I'm afraid." Margaret's home was a tidy white clapboard house on a quiet side street, with a small front garden bright with late summer flowers. Inside, it was cozy and well-kept, with comfortable if slightly old-fashioned furnishings. The spare room prepared for Catherine was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a writing desk positioned beneath a window that overlooked a kitchen garden. "It's not grand," Margaret said apologetically, "but I hope you'll be comfortable here until you decide whether to stay permanently." "It's lovely," Catherine assured her. "Thank you for opening your home to me." The rest of the day passed in a whirl of activity. Despite Catherine's protests that she needed rest, neighbors began arriving almost immediately, bringing food and welcome gifts while barely disguising their eagerness to meet the new teacher and hear the story of her dramatic arrival in Wyoming territory. Mrs. Peterson, the school board member, arrived first, a thin, energetic woman with iron-gray hair and piercing eyes that missed nothing. "We've been praying for a qualified teacher for 2 years," she said, examining Catherine as if assessing a piece of merchandise. When Margaret wrote that her niece was experienced and willing to come west, it seemed like divine providence. "I hope I can meet your expectations," Catherine said, feeling somewhat like a specimen under a microscope. "I'm sure you will, Mrs. Peterson replied, though her tone suggested the jury was still out. "Henry Callahan speaks highly of you, and he's not a man to give praise lightly." Catherine felt a flutter of surprise. "You've spoken with Mr. Callahan about me?" "He rode in early this morning to meet with Sheriff Matthews about the robbery," Mrs. Peterson explained. "Stopped by my home afterwards, since I chair the school board. Said you were educated, intelligent, and exactly what our children need." Her gaze sharpened. "He's not a man who forms opinions hastily, which makes his endorsement all the more significant." Before Catherine could respond to this revelation, more visitors arrived: the minister and his wife, the banker and his family, the general store proprietor. Each brought food or small gifts, and each clearly wanted to assess the newcomer for themselves. By evening, Catherine was exhausted but also touched by the community's welcome. After the last visitor departed, she sank gratefully into a chair in her aunt's sitting room. "I've never been the subject of so much attention in my life," she said, accepting the cup of tea Margaret offered. "Is it always like this?" Margaret laughed. "New arrivals are a rarity, especially unmarried, educated women. Half the town's matrons are already planning which eligible bachelor they'll introduce you to first." She gave Catherine a shrewd look. "Though I notice Henry Callahan seems to have made quite an impression already." Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He saved my life, Aunt Margaret." "Of course I think highly of him." Margaret murmured, clearly unconvinced. "Well, he's certainly a better prospect than most, established, respected, educated." She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Though there are those who find him too serious, too contained. The war left its mark on him, as it did on so many men." "He seems at peace with himself," Catherine observed. "There's a quietness to him, but not in a restless way." "Perhaps," Margaret allowed. "But a woman wants more than quiet in a husband, Catherine. She wants conversation, shared interests, laughter." "I'm not looking for a husband, Aunt Margaret," Catherine protested, though the words didn't ring entirely true even to her own ears. "I've come here to teach, to build a new life for myself." "Of course, dear," Margaret said, patting her hand. "I'm merely thinking aloud. Now, you should rest. Tomorrow we'll visit the schoolhouse so you can begin planning your lessons." That night, in the unfamiliar narrow bed in her aunt's spare room, Catherine found herself thinking of the comfortable guest room at Callahan Ranch, with its view of the mountains and the sound of distant cattle lowing in the meadows. She thought of Henry's library, filled with books that spoke to a mind far more complex than his outward appearance suggested. And she thought of Henry himself, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the way his blue eyes seemed to see right through her pretenses to the person beneath. It was foolish, she knew, to harbor such thoughts about a man she had known for mere days, a man who had shown her nothing more than basic kindness and hospitality. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, it was his voice saying her name that echoed in her mind, and his face she saw in her dreams. The following week passed in a blur of activity, as Catherine prepared for the start of the school term. The schoolhouse, as Margaret had promised, was simple but well constructed, with rows of new desks, a teacher's desk on a small platform, a slate board, and even a small bookcase filled with readers, primers, and reference books. "It's not much compared to schools in the East," Sheriff Matthews's wife commented as she showed Catherine around. "But it's a start. The children are so excited to have a real school at last." Catherine found herself caught up in the excitement as well. She spent long hours planning lessons for students of various ages and abilities, organizing books and supplies, and meeting the parents of her future pupils. The work was exhausting but satisfying, especially when she saw the eager anticipation in the eyes of the children she encountered around town. Her health improved steadily. The discomfort in her ribs diminished day by day, and her shoulder, while still stiff, no longer pained her constantly. Dr. Wilson pronounced himself satisfied with her recovery when he examined her a week after her arrival in town. "You're healing nicely, Miss Kendrick," he said. "Just don't overdo it with the school preparations. Teaching 28 children of different ages will be taxing enough without starting the job already exhausted." Catherine tried to follow his advice, but there was so much to do before school began the following Monday. She was grateful for her aunt's support and the assistance of several town matrons who volunteered to help ready the schoolhouse. Throughout the week, she found herself watching for Henry Callahan whenever she was in town, but there was no sign of him. She told herself it was natural to wonder about the man who had saved her life, natural to feel a connection to him after their shared experience. But in quiet moments, she knew her interest went deeper than mere gratitude. On Saturday afternoon, as Catherine was arranging books in the schoolhouse, the door opened to admit a familiar figure. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw Henry standing there, hat in hand, looking somewhat hesitant. "Mr. Callahan," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "How nice to see you, Miss Kendrick," he replied, then corrected himself with a small smile. "Catherine, you're looking well. Recovery progressing?" "Yes, thank you. Dr. Wilson is quite pleased with my progress." She gestured to the schoolroom around her. "As you can see, I've been busy preparing for Monday's opening." Henry stepped further into the room, his eyes taking in the neat rows of desks, the books, the maps she had pinned to the walls. "You've done wonders with the place," he said. "It finally looks like a proper school." "The townspeople have been incredibly supportive," Catherine said. "Everyone has contributed something: books, supplies, their time." "This school means a great deal to Willow Creek," Henry said, moving to examine the small library she had arranged. Education wasn't a priority when the town was first established. Survival was. But now that things are more settled, people want better for their children. "Including you," Catherine observed. "Mrs. Peterson mentioned you were instrumental in pushing for a schoolhouse and a qualified teacher." A flush of color touched Henry's tanned cheeks. "I just helped with the building and contributed some funds. Mrs. Peterson and the other board members did the real work." "Still, it's admirable," Catherine said. "Not everyone values education as highly as you seem to." "My father was a teacher before he became a minister," Henry said. "He believed an educated mind was a gift from God to be developed and used wisely." He ran a finger along the spine of a mathematics textbook. "I've tried to honor that belief in my own way." There was something in his expression, a vulnerability, a glimpse of the boy he must once have been, eager to please a respected father, that touched Catherine deeply. "I'm sure he would be proud of what you've accomplished," she said softly. Henry's eyes met hers, a flash of surprise in their blue depths, as if he wasn't accustomed to such personal observations. "Thank you," he said simply. Then, seeming to gather himself, he added, "I actually came to see if you needed anything for the school that the board might have overlooked. Books, supplies, anything at all." "That's very kind of you. We could use more advanced readers for the older students and perhaps some maps. The only one we have is of the United States, and it's quite outdated." I have some maps in my library that I'd be happy to donate, Henry offered. And I could order readers from Denver on my next trip. That would be wonderful, Catherine said gratefully. The older children especially will benefit. They spent the next half hour discussing the school's needs, with Henry offering practical suggestions based on his own education and experience teaching Tomas. Catherine found herself once again impressed by his knowledge and thoughtfulness. Will Tomas be joining us when school begins? She asked. Yes, though he'll only be able to attend 3 days a week due to his duties at the ranch, Henry replied. He's very excited, wouldn't stop talking about it all week. I look forward to having him, Catherine said sincerely. From what you've told me, he's quite bright. He is, Henry agreed with evident pride. Just needed an opportunity. He glanced out the window, noting the position of the sun. I should be going. I promised Sheriff Matthews I'd stop by before heading back to the ranch. Of course, Catherine said, trying to hide her disappointment that their conversation was ending. Thank you for coming and for your offer of maps and books. I'll bring the maps by tomorrow after church, Henry said, settling his hat back on his head. If that's convenient. Perfectly convenient, Catherine replied, perhaps too quickly. I'll be here in the afternoon finishing preparations. He nodded, then hesitated at the door. It's good to see you settled in Willow Creek, Catherine. I think you'll do well here. I hope so, she said. I already feel more at home than I expected to. Something in her tone or expression made him pause, his eyes searching hers. I'm glad, he said quietly. Then, with a tip of his hat, he was gone, leaving Catherine with a curious mixture of happiness at having seen him again and longing for more time in his company. She returned to arranging books, but her thoughts remained on Henry Callahan, and the growing certainty that her feelings for him were becoming something far more complicated than gratitude. Sunday brought clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect for Catherine's first church service in Willow Creek. The small white church was filled to capacity, with families dressed in their Sunday best eager to catch a glimpse of the new teacher. Catherine sat beside her aunt in a pew near the front, acutely aware of the curious glances directed her way. The minister, Reverend Simmons, had visited her earlier in the week, and he now acknowledged her presence with a warm smile before beginning the service. She was halfway through the second hymn when she sensed, rather than saw, someone enter the church. Glancing toward the back, she saw Henry slipping quietly into one of the rear pews. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded sanctuary, and he gave her a small nod before turning his attention to the hymnal. Throughout the service, Catherine found her gaze drawn repeatedly to where Henry sat. He sang the hymns in a pleasant baritone and listened attentively to the sermon. There was something deeply appealing about seeing this strong, capable man participating in the quiet rituals of worship. After the service, the congregation gathered outside the church for the usual Sunday socializing. Catherine was immediately surrounded by parents eager to introduce their children and ask questions about the upcoming school term. She answered as best she could while trying to keep track of names and faces. "You're quite the center of attention," a familiar voice observed, and she turned to find Henry standing nearby, looking somewhat uncomfortable in his Sunday suit. "Not by choice, I assure you," she replied with a smile. "I think half the town is determined to assess my fitness as a teacher before classes even begin. And the other half is wondering if you'll make a suitable wife for one of Willow Creek's bachelors," Henry said, a hint of amusement in his eyes. Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "So my aunt has informed me. Apparently, eligible women are in short supply." "That they are," Henry agreed. Before he could say more, they were interrupted by Mrs. Peterson, who swept up with determined energy. "Miss Kendrick, I want to introduce you to my nephew, Edward," she said, pulling forward a thin young man with spectacles and a nervous smile. "He's our town clerk and a member of the school board. Edward, this is Miss Kendrick, our new teacher." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Kendrick," Edward said, his voice as thin as his frame. "We're all very excited about the school opening." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I'm looking forward to it as well." Mrs. Peterson beamed at them both, her matchmaking intentions painfully obvious. "Edward has been instrumental in organizing the school records and securing funding from the territorial government." "That's admirable work," Catherine said politely, though she couldn't help noticing that Henry had taken a small step back, as if preparing to leave. "Edward will be attending the welcome dinner for you tonight," Mrs. Peterson continued. "Perhaps he could escort you." "That's very kind," Catherine began, "but my aunt, I'm sure Margaret wouldn't mind," Mrs. Peterson pressed. "Would you, Margaret?" she added as Catherine's aunt joined the group. Margaret glanced between Catherine, Edward, and significantly Henry, who was now looking decidedly uncomfortable. "Catherine is still recovering from her injuries," she said diplomatically. "I think it's best if she walks with me. But of course, Edward is welcome to join our table at the dinner." Mrs. Peterson looked disappointed but nodded. Of course. Another time, perhaps." As the conversation shifted to details about the community dinner planned that evening, Henry excused himself quietly. "I should be going. Ranch business to attend to. Catherine, I'll bring those maps by the schoolhouse later as promised." "Thank you," she said, wishing they could have spoken longer. "I'll be there after the dinner, around 7. He nodded and moved away, exchanging brief greetings with other townspeople as he went. Catherine watched him go, aware of a sense of loss that seemed disproportionate to their brief interaction. "Henry Callahan isn't much for social gatherings," Mrs. Peterson observed, following Catherine's gaze. "Never has been, not since he came back from the war. Keeps to himself mostly, except for church and town council meetings." "He's a private man," Margaret agreed, "but a good one. The town owes him a great deal, though he'd never acknowledge it." The community dinner that evening was held in the town hall, a large open room attached to the sheriff's office. Nearly everyone in Willow Creek attended, bringing dishes to share in a potluck feast that showcased the community's best cooking. Catherine found herself seated at a table with her aunt, Reverend Simmons and his wife, Sheriff Matthews and his family, and as promised, Edward Peterson, who seemed determined to impress her with his knowledge of territorial education regulations. Throughout the evening, Catherine met dozens of parents and children, trying to remember names and connections while answering questions about her teaching philosophy and experience. By the time the dinner ended, her head was spinning with information, and she was grateful for the excuse to slip away to the schoolhouse. The building was quiet and cool in the early evening light as she lit the lamps and continued her preparations for the next day. She had just finished arranging the primers for the youngest students when a knock at the door announced Henry's arrival. He entered carrying a leather portfolio and a small wooden crate. "As promised," he said, setting both on her desk. "Maps and a few books from my library that might be useful." Catherine opened the portfolio to find several beautifully detailed maps, one of North America, another of Europe, a third of the world. "These are wonderful," she said, running her fingers lightly over the careful lettering. "Much better than anything I could have ordered." "They were my father's," Henry said. "He believed in understanding the wider world, even while living in a small corner of it." The crate contained a dozen books' histories, a volume of Shakespeare, several advanced readers, and a beautifully illustrated natural history with detailed drawings of plants and animals. "Henry, these are too valuable to donate to a schoolhouse where they might be damaged," Catherine protested. Books are meant to be read, not preserved, he said firmly. Besides, I've read them all many times over. Better they inspire young minds here than gather dust on my shelves. Catherine was touched by his generosity. Thank you. The children will benefit greatly from these. Henry nodded, seeming pleased by her reaction. How was the welcome dinner? He asked, leaning against the edge of her desk. Overwhelming, Catherine admitted. So many names to remember, so many questions to answer, and Mrs. Peterson seemed determined that her nephew and I become better acquainted. A flicker of something amusement, concern, crossed Henry's face. Edward is a good man, bit hesitant in his manner but honest and hardworking. He seems very proper, Catherine said diplomatically. Henry's lips twitched. That's one way to describe him, yes. Were you invited to the dinner? Catherine asked, curious about his absence. I was, he acknowledged, but large gatherings aren't to my taste. Besides, I had ranch matters to attend to. So Mrs. Peterson said. She seems to think you're something of a recluse. Henry smiled wryly. Not a recluse, just selective about my company. Their eyes met, and Catherine felt a warmth spread through her at the implication that she was company he chose to keep. The moment stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken possibilities. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Henry asked, breaking the silence. A little, Catherine admitted. 28 children of different ages and abilities is a challenge even for an experienced teacher. You'll do fine, Henry said with quiet confidence. You have patience and intelligence, and you clearly care about education. The children will respond to that. I hope so, Catherine said, touched by his faith in her. I want to make a difference here, to build something meaningful. You will, Henry said simply. He straightened from the desk. I should let you finish your preparations. Is there anything else you need before tomorrow? Catherine shook her head, though what she truly wanted was for him to stay longer. No, thank you. You've been more than generous already. He moved toward the door, then paused. I've asked Tomas to report to me how the first day goes, he said with a hint of a smile. So teach well, Miss Kendrick. I'll do my best, Mr. Callahan, she replied, matching his teasing tone. After he left, Catherine found herself smiling as she returned to her preparations. Henry's quiet confidence in her abilities had eased her anxiety about the next day, and his thoughtful gifts would make her teaching far more effective. More than that, their easy conversation and the subtle connection between them left her feeling buoyant, as if something promising was taking root in the fertile soil of their growing acquaintance. The first day of school dawned clear and cool, a perfect September morning. Catherine arrived at the schoolhouse an hour early, her stomach fluttering with nerves despite her thorough preparations. She arranged the primers on the desks for the youngest children, checked that her lesson plans were in order, and wrote a welcoming message on the slate board. The first student arrived 20 minutes before the official start time, a solemn-faced girl of about 10 with neatly braided blonde hair and a worn but clean dress. She stood hesitantly in the doorway until Catherine beckoned her in. Good morning, Catherine greeted her warmly. You're nice and early. I'm Miss Kendrick. I know, madam, the girl replied. I'm Sarah Miller. My pa says being early shows respect. Your father is quite right, Catherine said. Would you like to help me ring the bell when it's time for school to begin? Sarah's serious face brightened, and she nodded eagerly. By the time the school bell rang at 8 o'clock, most of the students had arrived, children ranging from 6 to 16, some confident, others shy, all curious about their new teacher. Tomas was among the last to arrive, riding in on a pinto pony that he tethered outside before slipping into the schoolhouse with an apologetic smile. Sorry, Miss Kendrick, he said. Had to help with the morning chores before I could leave. "You're not late, Tomas," Catherine assured him, directing him to a seat near the back where the older students would sit. When all 28 students were seated, Catherine faced them with a calm smile that belied her racing heart. "Good morning, children. I'm Miss Kendrick, and I'm very pleased to be your teacher. This is a special day, the first day of Willow Creek's own school. I know some of you have had schooling before, while others are just beginning. We'll all learn together, and I promise to do my best to help each of you grow in knowledge and understanding." The morning proceeded more smoothly than Catherine had dared hope. She assessed the students' varying levels of knowledge, organized them into groups based on ability rather than age, and set them to work on appropriate tasks. The older students, including Tomas, helped with the younger ones, creating a collaborative atmosphere that Catherine hoped to nurture throughout the term. By the time the noon recess arrived, Catherine was tired but exhilarated. The children spilled out into the schoolyard with their lunch pails, and she sank gratefully into her chair, taking a moment to rest before joining them outside. She was just unwrapping the sandwich her aunt had prepared when a shadow fell across her desk. Looking up, she was surprised to see Henry standing in the doorway. "Mr. Callahan," she said, rising quickly. "I didn't expect to see you today. Thought I'd see how the first morning went," he said, stepping into the schoolroom. "Tomas was supposed to report back, but I was in town on business and decided to check for myself." His eyes took in the orderly room, the work already displayed on the slate. "Seems you have everything well in hand." "It's going better than I expected," Catherine admitted. "The children are eager to learn and they've been very welcoming." "Children are good judges of character," Henry observed. "They know when an adult genuinely cares about them." He gestured to her sandwich. "I'm interrupting your lunch, I apologize." "Not at all," Catherine said quickly. "I'm happy for the company." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like to join me? There's plenty." A smile touched his lips. "Thank you, but I've already eaten. Besides, I think your students would prefer your attention during their recess." He nodded toward the window, where several younger children were peering in curiously. "They're probably wondering who you are," Catherine said, amused by their unabashed curiosity. "Would you like to meet them?" Henry looked momentarily uncomfortable but nodded. "Might as well. I'm on the school board, after all." Outside in the schoolyard, the children gathered around as Catherine introduced Henry. "This is Mr. Callahan, children. He's one of the people responsible for our lovely schoolhouse, and he donated those beautiful maps we looked at this morning." The children regarded him with varying degrees of interest and awe. Most knew him by reputation, and a few, like Tomas, knew him personally. A small boy of about 7 tugged at Henry's sleeve. "Are you really a cowboy, mister?" he asked, eyes wide. "My pa says you got the biggest ranch around." Henry crouched down to the boy's level. "I do have a ranch," he confirmed, "with cattle and horses. Do you like horses, son?" "Yes, sir. My pa promised I can have my own pony when I turn 8. That's a fine thing to look forward to." Henry glanced up at Catherine, a softness in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. "Having something to look forward to makes each day brighter, don't you think, Miss Kendrick?" "Indeed it does, Mr. Callahan," she agreed, understanding that he was speaking of something beyond a child's birthday gift. The afternoon session went as smoothly as the morning, and when the last student had departed, Catherine found herself alone in the schoolhouse, tired but deeply satisfied with the day's success. She was gathering her things to leave when the door opened once more, and Henry appeared, hat in hand. "Still here?" he asked. "I thought you'd be long gone by now." "Just finishing up," Catherine said, surprised but pleased to see him again. "Did you forget something?" "No," he admitted. "I just wanted to hear how the rest of the day went." Tomas was full of enthusiasm when I saw him riding home, but I wanted to hear your perspective. Catherine smiled, touched by his interest. It went well. Very well, in fact. The children are at different levels, of course, but they're all eager to learn. Even the oldest boys, who I feared might resent a female teacher, were respectful and attentive. As I said, children are good judges of character, Henry replied. He hesitated, then asked, "Would you allow me to walk you home? It's a fine evening and your aunt's house isn't far." The simple offer sent a flutter of pleasure through Catherine. "I'd like that very much," she said. They walked together through the town as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet streets. Their conversation flowed easily, moving from the day's events to broader topics, books they had both read, places they had seen, experiences that had shaped them. Henry spoke briefly but eloquently about his time in the war, not dwelling on the horrors but sharing how it had changed his perspective on life and what mattered most. "That's why I came west," he explained as they neared Margaret's house. "I needed open space, room to breathe, a place where I could build something with my own hands and see the direct results of my labor." "And have you found what you were seeking?" Catherine asked. Henry was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Most of it," he said finally. "The land has been good to me. I've built a life I can be proud of." He glanced at her, something unspoken in his eyes. But a man comes to realize that land and cattle, even success, aren't enough to fill all the empty spaces. Before Catherine could respond to this surprisingly personal revelation, they arrived at her aunt's gate. Henry opened it for her, his hand brushing hers in a touch that seemed both accidental and deliberate. "Thank you for walking with me," Catherine said, reluctant for their time together to end. "My pleasure," Henry replied. Perhaps we could do it again sometime." "I'd like that," Catherine said, her heart quickening at the tentative invitation. "Very much." A smile warmed his eyes. "Good night then, Catherine. Congratulations on a successful first day." "Good night, Henry." As she watched him walk away, Catherine knew with sudden clarity that her feelings for Henry Callahan had grown beyond admiration or gratitude. The connection between them was deepening into something that both thrilled and frightened her with its potential. The following weeks settled into a pleasant rhythm. School days were busy and fulfilling as Catherine guided her diverse group of students through their lessons. She quickly came to know each child's strengths and weaknesses, adjusting her teaching to meet their individual needs. Tomas proved to be one of her brightest pupils, absorbing new concepts with remarkable speed despite attending only 3 days a week. "Mr. Callahan says I might be able to go to college someday," he confided one afternoon as he helped her clean the slate boards. "If I study hard enough." "Do you think that's possible, Miss Kendrick?" "Absolutely," Catherine assured him. "You have a fine mind, Tomas, and determination. Those are the most important qualities for success in higher education." "Mr. Callahan said he'd help pay for it if I keep up my studies," Tomas added, his expression a mixture of pride and disbelief. "He says education is the best investment a man can make." This glimpse into Henry's generosity didn't surprise Catherine, but it did deepen her admiration for him. Throughout the weeks, their paths crossed regularly at church on Sundays, occasionally in town when Henry came in for supplies or meetings, and at the school board gatherings held once a month. True to his word, Henry often walked Catherine home after these meetings, their conversations growing increasingly personal as they became more comfortable with each other. She learned about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his close relationship with his scholarly father and gentle mother, both now deceased. He spoke of his hopes for his ranch and for Willow Creek's development. In turn, Catherine shared stories of her life in St. Louis, her love of teaching, and her dreams for the future. I never expected to find such fulfillment in a small western town, she admitted one crisp October evening as they walked beneath trees blazing with autumn colors. But I feel more at home here after a few weeks than I did in St. Louis these past years. The West has a way of claiming people, Henry said. It's not an easy life, but there's a freedom here, a chance to build something meaningful. Yes, exactly, Catherine agreed, pleased by his understanding. In St. Louis, I always felt constrained by expectations who I should be, how I should behave, whom I should marry. And here, Henry asked, his voice casual though his eyes watched her intently. Here I feel I can be myself, she said simply. The work is demanding, the conditions sometimes difficult, but there's an honesty to life here that I find liberating. Henry nodded, satisfaction in his expression. I felt the same when I first came, as if I could finally breathe again after years of feeling smothered. They walked in companionable silence for a time, each lost in thought. As they neared her aunt's house, Henry cleared his throat. Catherine, there's a harvest festival next Saturday at the town hall. Music, food, dancing. Would you do me the honor of attending with me? The formal invitation took her by surprise, though she had heard talk of the festival among her students. I'd be delighted, she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. Henry's face relaxed into a smile. Good, that's good. I'll call for you at 6 if that's agreeable. Perfectly agreeable, Catherine assured him, her heart light with anticipation. When she entered the house, her aunt was waiting in the parlor, a knowing smile on her face. Was that Henry Callahan I saw walking you home again? Yes, Catherine admitted, seeing no point in hiding what half the town had likely already observed. He's invited me to the harvest festival. Margaret's eyebrows rose. Has he indeed? Well, that's a significant step for Henry. He rarely attends social functions, and I can't remember the last time he escorted a lady anywhere. She studied Catherine's face. You care for him, don't you? I do, Catherine said softly. He's a good man, Aunt Margaret. Thoughtful, intelligent, kind. Yes, he is all those things, Margaret agreed. But Catherine, you should know there are aspects of Henry's past that few people here understand completely. The war changed him as it did many men. There are stories. He's mentioned the war, Catherine said. Not in detail, but enough that I understand it left its mark on him. Margaret seemed to weigh her words carefully. His regiment was involved in some of the worst fighting. He rarely speaks of it, but Mrs. Wilkins once told me that he still has nightmares sometimes. She paused. I'm not trying to discourage you, dear. Henry is one of the finest men I know. I just want you to be aware that loving a man who carries such burdens requires a special kind of strength. Catherine considered her aunt's words seriously. I believe I have that strength, she said finally. And I believe Henry is worth it. Margaret's expression softened. Then I'm happy for you both. Just proceed with care. Henry's heart has been guarded for a long time. It will take patience to earn his complete trust. The night of the harvest festival arrived with clear skies and a crispness to the air that hinted at the winter to come. Catherine spent more time than usual preparing, selecting her best dress, a deep blue wool that complemented her eyes, and arranging her chestnut hair in a style more elaborate than her usual simple knot. You look lovely, Margaret pronounced when Catherine emerged from her room. That shade of blue suits you perfectly. You think it's too much? Catherine asked, suddenly nervous. I don't want to appear as if I'm trying too hard. Margaret smiled. My dear, a woman should always try too hard when she's being escorted by a man she cares for. Besides, Henry will appreciate the effort even if he may not comment on it directly. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock sounded at the door. Henry stood on the porch, dressed in what was clearly his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his beard trimmed. He held his hat in his hands, and a flicker of admiration crossed his face when he saw Catherine. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Catherine replied, warmed by the genuine appreciation in his eyes. "You look quite handsome yourself." Henry offered his arm, and they walked together toward the town hall, where lanterns were already lit, and the sounds of music and laughter spilled into the street. Inside, the large room had been transformed with autumn decorations, dried cornstalks, pumpkins, and colorful leaves adorning the walls and tables. A small band played in one corner, and several couples were already dancing. "Miss Kendrick." Children's voices called out as Catherine's students spotted her, rushing over to greet their teacher and eye her escort with undisguised curiosity. "Good evening, children," Catherine said warmly. "Are you enjoying the festival?" They nodded enthusiastically, though their attention remained fixed on Henry, whose presence at a social event was clearly noteworthy. After the children had been called back to their parents, Henry guided Catherine through the crowd, stopping frequently as townspeople greeted them. Catherine was struck by the respect with which everyone treated Henry. Even those who seemed surprised to see him at the festival addressed him with deference, though their curious glances between him and Catherine made their speculation obvious. "People are staring," Catherine murmured as they found a relatively quiet corner. "Not at you," Henry said with a wry smile. "I'm something of a novelty at these gatherings. I haven't attended a town dance in years, and I've certainly never escorted anyone." "Never?" Catherine asked, surprised. "Not since I came to Willow Creek," he confirmed. His eyes held hers. "I've never had sufficient reason until now." The simple statement, delivered without dramatic emphasis but with quiet sincerity, sent warmth spreading through Catherine's chest. Before she could respond, the band struck up a lively reel, and Henry held out his hand. "Would you do me the honor of a dance, Miss Kendrick?" "With pleasure, Mr. Callahan," she replied, placing her hand in his. Henry proved to be a capable dancer, guiding Catherine through the steps with confident ease. "You seem surprised," he observed, noting her expression. "I admit I didn't expect you to be so accomplished on the dance floor," Catherine confessed. "My mother insisted I learn," Henry explained as they circled each other. "Said no education was complete without knowledge of the social graces. I haven't had much occasion to practice in recent years, but some skills, once learned, are never entirely forgotten." They danced several more sets, stopping occasionally for refreshments or conversation with townspeople. Catherine noticed Edward Peterson watching them from across the room, his expression a mixture of disappointment and resignation. "I believe you've broken Mr. Peterson's heart," Henry observed, following her gaze. "I doubt that very much," Catherine replied. "His aunt's ambitions, perhaps, but not his heart." "Don't underestimate your effect on men's hearts, Catherine," Henry said, his voice dropping lower. "Some of us are more vulnerable than we appear." Before Catherine could fully process this remark, Mrs. Wilkins appeared beside them, her face flushed with the exertion of dancing. "Well, don't you two make a handsome couple," she declared without preamble. "Henry Callahan at a dance. I never thought I'd see the day." "Good evening, Mrs. Wilkins," Henry said, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "You're looking very festive tonight." "Pish-posh," the housekeeper said, waving away the compliment. "I'm an old woman having a rare night of fun, but you two," she beamed at them both. "It does my heart good to see you here together." After Mrs. Wilkins moved on, Henry turned to Catherine with an apologetic smile. "She means well, but subtlety has never been her strong suit." "I like her directness," Catherine said. "It's refreshing." As the evening progressed, they stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The night was clear and cool, with stars scattered like diamonds across the black velvet sky. Henry draped his coat around Catherine's shoulders when he noticed her shiver. "Thank you for accompanying me tonight," he said as they stood looking up at the stars. "It's been more enjoyable than I expected." "Because of the festival or the company?" Catherine asked, emboldened by the magical quality of the evening. Henry's gaze shifted from the stars to her face. "The company, without question," he said softly. "I haven't felt this content in a very long time." "Neither have I," Catherine admitted. They stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, see the way the moonlight silvered the edges of his dark hair. Henry's eyes held hers, and she saw in them a question, a hesitation, and beneath that, a longing that matched her own. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to draw away, he leaned closer. His lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it was almost reverent, a whisper of connection that nonetheless sent Catherine's heart racing. When he drew back, his eyes searched hers, looking for assurance that he hadn't overstepped. "Catherine," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I know we haven't known each other long, but Henry Callahan." Mrs. Peterson's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Is that you out here in the dark? The committee is looking for you. It's time for the prize announcements." Henry closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering patience. "I'll be right there, Mrs. Peterson," he called back, his voice remarkably steady considering the interruption. When the woman had retreated, muttering about responsibilities and propriety, Henry turned back to Catherine with a rueful smile. "Duty calls, it seems. We should go back inside." "Of course," Catherine agreed, though she felt a keen disappointment that their moment had been cut short. As they walked back toward the hall, Henry took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. "We'll continue our conversation another time," he promised quietly, "when we have more privacy." The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant blur. Henry fulfilled his duty of announcing the winners of various harvest competitions, then returned to Catherine's side for the final dances of the night. Though they didn't speak further of the kiss, or what Henry had been about to say, something had shifted between them, a mutual acknowledgement of feelings that went beyond friendship or casual interest. When Henry escorted Catherine home later that night, he kissed her once more at her aunt's gate, a kiss less hesitant than the first but equally respectful. "Good night, Catherine," he said softly. "Thank you for a memorable evening." "Good night, Henry," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll see you at church tomorrow. Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he assured her with a smile that stayed with her long after she had retired to her room. As Catherine prepared for bed, her thoughts full of Henry and the evening they had shared, she realized that her life had changed irrevocably the day she was thrown from that stagecoach. What had begun as a terrifying ordeal had led her to this moment, to this man, to a future suddenly rich with possibility. For the first time since her father's death, Catherine fell asleep with a heart full of hope and the certainty that she had found where she truly belonged. The following weeks brought a deepening of the relationship between Catherine and Henry. Their courtship progressed with a measured pace that respected the conventions of the time, while allowing their feelings for each other to grow naturally. They spent Sunday afternoons together after church, sometimes in the company of Margaret or other friends, sometimes alone for walks along the creek that gave the town its name. Henry began riding into town more frequently, often timing his visits to coincide with the end of the school day so he could walk Catherine home. The townspeople quickly grew accustomed to seeing them together, and while there was plenty of gossip, most of it was good-natured and approving. "You've brought Henry Callahan back to life," Mrs. Wilkins declared one Sunday when she caught Catherine alone after church. I haven't seen him this happy since before the war." "He's done the same for me," Catherine admitted. "I came west out of necessity with little hope for my future. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." As November brought colder weather and occasional snow flurries, Henry invited Catherine and Margaret to visit the ranch for Thanksgiving dinner. "Mrs. Wilkins insists," he explained, though his eyes told Catherine the invitation came from him as well. "She says the house needs feminine company for the holiday." "We'd be delighted," Margaret accepted for them both. "It will be a welcome change from my cooking." The Thanksgiving visit was a day Catherine would long remember. The ranch looked different in winter, the landscape stark but beautiful under a light dusting of snow. Inside, the house was warm and inviting, with a fire crackling in the large stone fireplace and delicious aromas emanating from the kitchen. Mrs. Wilkins had outdone herself, preparing a feast that included not only a magnificent roasted turkey, but also ham, several vegetables from the root cellar, fresh baked rolls, and 3 different pies. The foreman and his family joined them, along with Tomas and 2 other ranch hands who had nowhere else to go for the holiday. After the meal, while the others gathered in the parlor for conversation, Henry invited Catherine to join him for a short walk. Despite the cold, she eagerly accepted, bundling up in the warm coat he provided. "I want to show you something," he said, leading her not toward the barn or corrals but up a small rise behind the house. At the top of the rise stood a single large pine tree, and beneath it, a small fenced enclosure containing 2 simple wooden crosses. Henry opened the gate and led Catherine inside. "My parents," he explained softly. "When they died, my father of heart failure, my mother of pneumonia, a year later, I had their bodies brought west. I couldn't bear to leave them behind when I came here to start a new life." Catherine was deeply moved by this glimpse into Henry's heart, his connection to family, his sense of continuity and respect for those who had shaped him. "It's a beautiful resting place," she said, taking his gloved hand in hers. "They can see everything you've built." "I hope they would be proud," Henry said, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "My father especially. He always believed in the importance of creating something lasting, something that would benefit others beyond our own time. The ranch, the school, the community you've helped build, these are lasting legacies," Catherine assured him. "He would be very proud." They stood in silence for a moment, paying respect to the people who had raised the man Catherine now knew she loved. Then Henry turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Catherine, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." His blue eyes were serious, intent on hers. "We haven't known each other long in the traditional sense, but sometimes life brings people together in unexpected ways, and the connection is immediate, undeniable." Catherine's heart began to race as she realized what might be coming. "Yes," she said simply, encouraging him to continue. "When I found you that day, thrown clear of the stagecoach, something changed for me," Henry said. "I didn't recognize it at first. I was too focused on getting you to safety, on making sure you survived. But in the days that followed, as I watched your strength, your grace in the face of tragedy, your kindness to Mrs. Wilkins, your interest in my books." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I began to hope for something I'd given up on long ago." "What was that?" Catherine asked softly. "A partner," Henry said. "Someone to share my life with, to build a future with. Someone who sees the world as I do, full of possibility and purpose, even in the face of hardship." He released one of her hands to reach into his coat pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "Catherine Kendrick, I love you. Your strength, your intelligence, your compassion, your determination, everything about you. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Catherine's eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming joy. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Henry, I will marry you." His face broke into a smile of such unrestrained happiness that it transformed him, erasing the reserve that usually characterized his expression. He opened the box to reveal a ring with a modest but beautifully cut diamond flanked by 2 small sapphires. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "The blue stones reminded me of your eyes the first time I saw you, looking up at me from that sagebrush, determined to survive despite your injuries." "It's beautiful," Catherine said, admiring how the stones caught the winter sunlight. "I'll cherish it always, as a symbol of how we found each other." Henry drew her close, his kiss a perfect blend of tenderness and passion that promised a lifetime of love. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find happiness like this again," he confessed. "After the war, I believed that part of me was gone forever." "And now?" Catherine asked, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. "Now I know that hope can be reborn," he said, "even in the most unexpected circumstances. You were thrown from that stage and I carried you back to town, but Catherine, you carried hope back to me." They returned to the house hand in hand, their happiness evident to everyone gathered there. Margaret was the first to notice the ring on Catherine's finger, and her delighted exclamation drew everyone's attention. "It's official, then?" Mrs. Wilkins asked, her eyes suspiciously bright. "It is," Henry confirmed, his arm around Catherine's waist. "Miss Kendrick has done me the great honor of agreeing to become my wife." The announcement was met with congratulations and genuine happiness from everyone present. Even Margaret, who had initially harbored some reservations about the speed of their relationship, seemed thoroughly convinced by the evident love between them. As the day drew to a close, and Henry helped Catherine and Margaret into the buggy for their return to town, he leaned in for one more kiss. "We have much to discuss: the wedding date, living arrangements, your teaching position," he said. "But all that can wait. For today, let's simply celebrate finding each other." "Yes," Catherine agreed, her heart full to overflowing. "Today is for gratitude and joy." As the buggy pulled away from the ranch house, Catherine looked back at Henry standing on the porch, his tall figure outlined against the warm light from within. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of coming home, not to a place, but to a person, to a love that had found her in the most unexpected circumstance and changed the course of her life forever. The story of the stagecoach robbery that had nearly claimed her life would always be a part of her, but it was no longer a tale of tragedy and loss. Instead, it had become the beginning of something beautiful, the moment when disaster transformed into destiny, when a chance encounter became the foundation for a lifetime of love. Catherine and Henry were married on Christmas Eve in the small white church of Willow Creek, with snow falling gently outside and candles illuminating the interior with golden light. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, which was simple but deeply meaningful. Catherine wore a gown of ivory silk that Margaret had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once belonged to her mother. Henry, handsome in his best suit, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of such profound love and wonder that it brought tears to many eyes. "The first time I saw her, she was bruised and battered but fighting to survive," he said in his vows. "I knew then she was a woman of extraordinary strength. What I couldn't have known was how completely she would claim my heart, how thoroughly she would transform my life. Catherine, I pledge to honor that strength, to cherish your heart, and to walk beside you through whatever life brings us, as long as we both shall live." Catherine's voice was steady as she responded, "Henry, You found me at my most vulnerable moment and carried me to safety. But what you truly restored was my hope for the future, for happiness, for love. I promise to stand with you in all seasons, to face life's challenges with the same courage and determination that you've shown, and to love you completely, all the days of my life. After the ceremony, the celebration continued at the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every family in Willow Creek. There was music and dancing, laughter and tears, as the community celebrated not just a marriage but the healing of a man many had thought would never fully recover from the wounds of war. Late that night, Henry brought his bride home to the ranch, their home now. As they crossed the threshold, he surprised her by sweeping her into his arms, much as he had done that first day when he carried her, injured, into the same house. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Home," Catherine repeated, the word filled with all the promise of their shared future. "Yes, I am finally, truly home." In the years that followed, their love only deepened. Catherine continued teaching until the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Hope, in recognition of what they had restored in each other. A son followed 2 years later, named James after Henry's father. Both children grew up surrounded by books, horses, and the boundless sky of Wyoming. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, as did the school Catherine had helped establish. Henry's nightmares, once frequent, became increasingly rare as the peace he had found in Catherine's love gradually healed even the deepest wounds from his past. Sometimes, on clear evenings, they would walk together to the rise where Henry's parents were buried, now joined by a small marker for the victims of the stagecoach robbery, who had been given a proper burial on Callahan land. There, with the ranch spread out below them and the mountains rising in the distance, they would stand in quiet gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. You ever think about how differently our lives might have unfolded? Catherine asked on one such evening as they watched the sun setting in a blaze of red and gold. "If the stagecoach hadn't been attacked, if I hadn't been thrown clear, if you hadn't come along when you did." Henry tightened his arm around her waist, drawing her closer to his side. "I've learned not to question the strange paths that lead us to where we're meant to be," he said. "That day, as terrible as it was, brought me the greatest gift of my life, you, and through you, our children and this happiness I never thought I'd know again." Catherine rested her head against his shoulder, listening to the distant sounds of their children playing under Mrs. Wilkins's watchful eye, the lowing of cattle in the meadows, the whisper of wind through pine trees. This was the life she had never known she wanted until fate and circumstance and one good man's kindness had shown her the way home. "When you carried me back to the ranch that day," she said softly, "you weren't just saving my life, Henry. You were starting a new chapter in both our stories." "The best chapter," Henry agreed, turning to kiss her as the last rays of sunlight gilded their faces. "And one that's still being written every day we spend together." In that moment, as in countless others that would follow through the years of their marriage, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that being thrown from that stagecoach had been not an ending but a beginning, the first step on a journey that had led her to true love, to family, to purpose, and to a happiness deeper and more enduring than she had ever dared to hope for.